In the dead of the Siberian winter, the environment is not just a location, it is a predator. When the temperature drops below minus 40 degrees Celsius, the laws of physics change. Solid steel becomes as brittle as glass, breaking under the slightest pressure. Heavy rubber tires freeze and shatter like delicate porcelain. And standard engine lubricants, they transform into a thick, useless paste, completely freezing the internal mechanics of any vehicle. For the Soviet Army operating across the vast frozen plains of the taiga and the Arctic, these brutal conditions represented a logistical nightmare. It was a silent enemy that could paralyze an entire mechanized division in a single night. Think about it. A military truck that won't start is nothing more than a heavy, useless block of frozen metal. And during the high-stakes tension of the Cold War, a stationary army was a defeated army. But how do you fight an enemy you cannot shoot? How do you keep thousands of heavy military engines alive when the air itself is frozen? The solution to this existential threat wasn't a larger engine, nor was it a special blend of winter fuel. Instead, the Soviets relied on a strange roaring device hidden deep beneath the truck's chassis, a piece of brutalist engineering known as the Boiler-Type Engine Preheater. To understand why this strange device was invented, we have to look at the immense scale of the Soviet frontier. During the mid-20th century, Soviet military doctrine relied heavily on rapid, mass mobilization. Thousands of heavy trucks, armored personnel carriers, and missile launchers had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. But nature had other plans. In places like Yakutsk or Siberia, if you turn off a diesel engine for just a few hours in the winter, the block cools down completely. The oil thickens to the consistency of tar. When a driver tries to turn the key, the starter motor simply cannot overcome the immense friction of the frozen oil. The battery, drained by the extreme cold, dies within seconds. The entire military machine grinds to a halt. Western armies often relied on heated garages or continuous idling, leaving the engines running for days on end. But for the Soviets, this was impossible. Heated garages were a luxury they couldn't build across thousands of miles of empty wilderness. And leaving engines idling wasted millions of gallons of precious fuel while creating massive thermal signatures that Western spy satellites could easily detect from space. They needed a system that was rugged, independent, and absolutely bulletproof. It had to work in the middle of nowhere, with zero electrical grid support. The solution they engineered was pure Soviet design, simple, chaotic, yet brilliantly effective. Instead of trying to heat the whole truck, they built a compact miniature furnace underneath the engine block. This was the Boiler-Type Preheater. The system was directly integrated into the truck's cooling and oil systems. It consisted of a small combustion chamber, a fuel burner fed directly from the main diesel or gasoline tank, and a series of heat exchangers. When a Soviet convoy had to park in the frozen wilderness for the night, the soldiers didn't just walk away, they prepared the preheaters. The operation was intense. A soldier would ignite the burner underneath the chassis. Within minutes, the strange device would begin to roar, spitting a small flame inside its internal chamber. This miniature furnace began to rapidly boil the engine's coolant liquid. Through the natural laws of thermodynamics and thermosiphon flow, where hot fluid rises and cold fluid sinks, the boiling coolant began to circulate naturally through the frozen engine block, entirely without the help of a mechanical water pump. But the genius of this engineering wasn't just in heating the coolant. The device performed a brilliant triple-action heating process simultaneously. First, the hot liquid warmed the cylinder heads, expanding the frozen metal back to its operational tolerances. Second, the exhaust gases from this mini boiler weren't just vented away into the atmosphere. The exhaust pipe was strategically bent and directed underneath the engine's oil pan. The superheated exhaust gases blasted the exterior metal of the oil pan, melting the frozen tar-like oil back into a smooth, lubricating liquid. Third, the residual heat rose upward into the cabin, providing a primitive but life-saving source of warmth for the frozen soldiers waiting inside. Within 30 to 40 minutes of activating this roaring boiler, a truck parked in a minus 50-degree blizzard would be warmed to optimal starting temperatures. The oil was fluid, The metal was warm, and the engine would roar to life on the very first crank. This rugged piece of technology completely altered the tactical landscape of winter warfare. While NATO forces struggled with complex logistics, external generators, and specialized anti-freeze fluids that often failed in extreme conditions, the Soviet trucks carried their own self-sustaining survival systems wherever they went. Whether it was the iconic Ural 375, the massive Kam-Az trucks, or heavy artillery tractors, the roar of the preheater boiler was the distinctive soundtrack of a Soviet winter camp. It allowed the military to maintain the element of surprise. They could hide entire divisions in the deep frozen forests of the taiga, turn off their main engines to remain completely silent and invisible to thermal imaging, and then mobilize the entire force in less than an hour. It was a stark reminder of the Soviet engineering philosophy. It doesn't need to be elegant, it doesn't need to be beautiful, but it absolutely must work when the world freezes over. As the Cold War wound down, the technology didn't vanish. The basic principles of the Soviet boiler preheater laid the foundation for modern automotive engineering. Today, advanced commercial systems like Webasto or Eberspacher, which are installed in modern long-haul trucks and luxury cars operating in northern climates, use the exact same fundamental logic. They are highly digitized, computer-controlled, and run on microprocessors. But underneath the modern plastic covers, they are still mini boilers heating the coolant and oil before the engine ever starts. When we look back at the history of military engineering, we often focus on the biggest tanks, the fastest jets, or the most powerful missiles. But sometimes history is decided by the smallest, most unglamorous components. The ability of the Soviet Army to survive and operate in the harshest environments on Earth didn't come from grand strategic plans. It came from a loud, fire-spitting metal box hidden beneath a truck's frame. It was a simple machine that defied the freezing laws of physics, turning a frozen trap into a functional weapon. If you found this deep dive into Cold War military engineering and winter survival technology fascinating, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below on what you think of this brutalist engineering. Thanks for watching, and stay warm out there.